Record. All right, so it's recording. Time to make moves. All right, begin.
Hi guys, so today our poem that we have chosen is The Miracle of the Morning. In this poem, we are listing the personification, imagery, juxtaposition, alliteration, and rhyme. And those are all listed and highlighted within and throughout the poem. And the poem is by Amanda Gorman. Myself and my amigos, we will be presenting this presentation. My name is Harleen Camboge.
My name is Raquel Conduru.
My name is Melissa Garcia.
And we'll first start off with Raquel, and his question is, who is the author of this poem? So I will be passing it down to Raquel, and we will continue sharing all our questions with you guys today.
All right, so first we're going to be watching The Miracle of Morning, like actually performed by Amanda Gorman. So yeah.
I thought I'd awaken to a world in mourning, heavy clouds crowding a society storming, but there's something different on this golden morning, something magical in the sunlight, wide and warming. I see a dad with a stroller taking a jog across the street. A bright-eyed girl chases her dog. A grandma on a porch fingers her rosary. She grins as her young neighbor brings her groceries. While we might feel small, separate, and all alone, or people have never been more closely tethered, the question isn't if we will weather this unknown, but how we will weather this unknown together. So on this meaningful morn, we mourn and we mend like lights. We can't be broken even when we bend. As one, we will defeat both despair and disease. We stand with healthcare heroes and all employees, with families, libraries, schools, waiters, artists, businesses, restaurants, and hospitals hit hardest. We ignite not in the lights, but in lack thereof. For it is in loss that we truly learn to love. In this chaos, we will discover clarity. In suffering, we must find solidarity. For it's our grief that gives us our gratitude, shows us how to find hope if we ever lose it. So ensure this ache wasn't endured in vain. Do not ignore the pain. Give it purpose. Use it. Read children's books, dance alone to DJ music. Know that this distance will make our hearts grow fonder. From a wave of woes, our world will emerge stronger. We'll observe how the burdens braved by humankind are also the moments that make us humans kind. Let every dawn find us courageous, brought closer, heeding the light before the fight is over. When this ends, we'll smile sweetly, finally seeing. In testing times, we became the best of beings.
All right, so that was the end of the video. Okay, so who is Amanda Gorman? So The Miracle of Morning was written by Amanda Gorman. She's the youngest poet ever to be featured in a presidential inauguration, namely Joe Biden's inauguration in January of this year. She is most well known for her famous speech, The Hill We Climb, which was initially presented at the inauguration, which was a social commentary on the status of the United States recovering from COVID. However, she wasn't always a perfect writer or speaker. Gorman was born on March 7th, 1998, and grew up in Los Angeles with her two siblings. She was raised by a single mother who is currently a sixth grade teacher. From a young age, Gorman suffered from an auditory processing disorder and a speech impediment. For her, books and poetry were her main source of entertainment. By reading books, she became naturally inclined to start writing and eventually discovered her love of poetry. By practicing speaking and writing speeches, she was able to become a youth delegate for the United Nations and eventually attend Harvard University, where she'd be named National Youth Poet Laureate and go on to write the presidential inaugural poem in January. Okay, next, Melissa will say what's actually happening in the poem.
Hi, this is Melissa. The question two is what is actually happening in the poem. This poem literally describes the narrator waking up in the world that's recovering from either a pandemic or a natural disaster. At the beginning of the poem, the narrator states that they expected to wake up to a stormy morning. Jack actually wakes up to a calm and sunny morning. She sees common things such as a dad walking a stroller or a girl chasing their dog. The poem then describes the narrator's internal thoughts about the morning and reflects that to even experience a normal morning, they had to fight through society's collective troubles through isolation. The narrator reiterates that she had to stand alone with millions of others like her, regardless of profession, against the damage to society. Next is going to be Arlene doing the question three.
So I will be discussing for question three, what is the historical significance of the poem? The Miracle of the Morning was written in April 2020, less than a month after the first coronavirus lockdown in the United States. This was written in a time where people were uncertain about the future of America. People were losing jobs, struggling financially, and were completely isolated for the first time. The economy came to a complete stop for millions of people. There seemed like there wouldn't be any hope. People were consistently bombarded with news that hospitals all over the country were overfilled and so many people were buried that cemeteries ran out of space. The lockdown, along with this climate, made people afraid to leave their homes, much less interact in the way that Gorman describes in her poem. Gorman writes this poem in trying to convince a pandemic-stricken audience that despite them knowing what the world would have in store for society, that we'd continue to fight against the pandemic. She wants to make people believe that even though people aren't sure about the extent of the pandemic, that we emerge from it stronger and everything would be back to normal. I will lead off question 4 back to Melissa, and she will discuss what does the title of this poem represent.
Okay, question 4 is what does the title of the poem represent? The title of this poem represents the miracle of morning. It's a title that represents a rebirth of thought and feelings when someone wakes up. With respect to the historical context, the author uses the morning as a symbol of the beginning of a new day and a new world. She alludes to the night and the sleeping, the suffering of the world through the early stages of the pandemic, and the morning being people finally waking up from the fear and pain of their condition. Generally, when people wake up in the morning, they have a fresh new perspective, separate from the worries of the night before. By waking up in the poem, society is collectively ending the fear and pain of the early pandemic and starting to slowly recover back to normal life, where they can interact with each other again. Now, Rick, it's your time.
All right, so how are devices used to highlight Gorman's message? So we have 5 main rhetorical devices that are used in this poem: personification, imagery, juxtaposition, alliteration, and rhyme. So personification is a literary device of giving human characteristics to inanimate objects or non-human organisms. Imagery are elements in the poem that evoke sensory responses or appeal to emotions. Juxtaposition is a contrast between two elements that are placed closely together. Alliteration is the use of words that have similar sounds to close to each other for emphasis. And rhyme is a repetition of syllable sounds, usually at the end of a line in poetry. So as you can see, this is the annotated poem. So we have imagery in awakening to a world, see a dad with a stroller taking a jog, grandma on her porch fingers her rosaries, and we have like standing with healthcare heroes and all employees, and reading children's books and dancing alone to DJ music. These are all examples of imagery. Now for rhyme, it's pretty clear that at the end of each line or end of each related line, Gorman chose to rhyme at the end. And alliteration, we have examples such as meaningful mourn, mourn and we mend, grief that gives us our gratitude, and smile sweetly finally seeing, and testing times and best of beings. Juxtaposition is contrast of two elements that are placed closely together. So ignite none the light, but in lack thereof. And then a difference between loss and then love, a difference in chaos and then clarity, in suffering and solidarity. And then waves of woes are a world will emerge stronger. And these are examples of juxtaposition. So how is imagery being used? So imagery in this poem is being used to describe both the physical world that the narrator sees, as well as the responsibility she has as a member of society. The poem starts off with imagery about the narrator waking up in the morning. There's imagery throughout the poem that presents a setting for the poem, such as a dad with a stroller or a grandma on a porch fingers her, her rosaries, which are generally mundane things. However, with the context of the coronavirus, these things which are generally normal in society are restricted by the chains of the virus. These normal activities seem like picturesque fantasies in the light of the tragedy of COVID-19. After waking up, the author reminds the reader of society's condition by alluding to how people seem separate and alone. However, people continue to stand with the people on the front lines fighting the spread of the virus. The imagery then spreads to a personal call to action where Gorman says we should read children's books or dance alone to DJ music, which are things that remind the author of happiness or joy separate from the dangerous conditions of the virus. Now I'll pass on rhyme to Harleen.
So I will be discussing how is rhyme being used. The poem uses rhyme to connect related stanzas together. For example, when Gorman creates an image of what the narrator sees when they wake up, she connects the words jog and dog. Along with this, she also connects the other images of groceries and rosaries. Afterward, Gorman uses rhyme to highlight certain human characteristics such as vain and pain, along with others like stronger and closer. Her use of rhyme makes a more coherent call to action and a stronger case to not fear what lies ahead by making the message easier to remember. How is juxtaposition being used? Juxtaposition is mainly used to compare between the fear that people have regarding COVID and the bravery that Gorman wants us to have in facing the virus. A prime example of this is when Gorman writes, "In this chaos, we will discover clarity, and in suffering, we must find solidarity." The contrast between chaos and clarity represents the ideals that Gorman wants the reader to maintain regardless of the chaos that ensues within society. At the time this was written, people rioted and fought for immunization and toilet paper, while Gorman wants the reader to consider the more sane approach to the crisis. When Gorman says in suffering we must find solidarity, Gorman implores that the reader to find strength in the community present instead of constantly suffering due to the mounting losses of the early COVID. I will now pass on how is alliteration used in this poem to Melissa. Melissa, go ahead.
Okay. Now, how is alliteration used in this poem? Alliteration is used in a similar way to rhyme, where the author adds similar sounds to stanzas and lines that evoke a particular emotion. A prime example of this is a line, "For it is our grief that gives us our gratitude," which is another instance of juxtaposition. When Gorman describes grief, she refers to the pain and suffering that the death of COVID caused for families all over the globe. However, despite the grief, Gorman implores the reader to have compassion and gratitude towards other people and to continue to strive forward regardless of what comes ahead. In the near future, when COVID is over, Gorman wants us to feel grateful not only for health reasons, but for the fact that society was able to work together to heal America. The repeating G sound in these lines makes Gorman's message stick in the reader's mind. Another example is that when this end, Will smiles sweetly, finally thin line, where she continues the theme of being grateful for one's health and society's ability to move forward from trauma. What is the theme of the poem? Gorman writes this poem as a call to action for people to remain calm during the coronavirus and focus on things that make you happy rather than living in fear. Thank you, everyone.
All right.